Thank you all for being here today for our 2017 Treasurers Webcast. Everything that we are going to be talking about today, whenever we reference the bylaws, will be the 2015 to 2017 chapter bylaws that you see on the screen. So whenever you are looking at your chapter's bylaws, just make sure that the correct biennium is listed in the upper left-hand corner. The next set of bylaws, which will be the 2017 to 2019 chapter bylaws, will be available early next year, as your delegates will be voting on proposed bylaws amendments at the upcoming convention. So one thing that we like to do, just for those of you who might need a refresher, or if you are serving in this capacity for the first time, is just to give you a broad overview of the Board of Directors structure so that you can know how you as treasurer fit into the overall board structure. So everyone that you see on the screen here, besides the president-elect position, are required according to the bylaws. So every chapter has to have a president, vice president, treasurer, counselor, and secretary. And even though the president-elect is not required, the bylaws do allow for you to have that position. It is listed as optional. If you do have someone serving in that position, they would then become a member of the board of directors. Everyone in these positions must be active, meaning dues-paying members of STTI and your chapter. They must be elected by ballot. And then the bylaws refers to these positions as your voting leaders, meaning your officers. So whenever there is a board vote that is required, these are the positions who are voting because these are your officers. Just to tell you a little bit more about some of the general responsibilities for everybody, everyone is expected to participate in business meetings, chapter activities, and communications, to submit reports at each board meeting related to position-specific functions, and to prepare the office for transition at the end of each term. To tell you a little bit more about each position specifically, before we dive deeper into the treasurer's role, sometimes it's nice to see what everybody else is required to be working on. So starting with the president, this person is really the main point of contact for the chapter because they serve as the chief representative. They are tasked with administering the business of the chapter, which means that annual business meeting that's required. They also will coordinate board of directors meetings, and really they serve as an ex officio member of committees with the exception of the Leadership Succession Committee, which the president cannot serve on in any capacity. And while they may not be actually tasked with submitting certain reports, they will be the person who makes sure that it does happen. So the president might follow up with you as treasurer to make sure that your portion of the annual report is completed, or the verification of fees form, or the IRS Form 990 if you're located in the United States. As I mentioned, the president-elect position is optional. Many chapters do choose to use it, and their sole responsibility is to shadow the president for 1 to 2 years, depending on that term. At the end of the president's term, this person then succeeds into the role of president. So really they're committing to, at the very least, 3 years where they are going to be first shadowing the president and then serving as president. And there may be some additional responsibilities that your chapter specifically wants this person to work on, but really the bylaws just allow for them to shadow the president for that time. Now, your vice president will perform the president's duties in the president's absence. That does include if the president vacates their role. So even if you had a president-elect, if the president had to step down 3 months early, the vice president would become president for those 3 months. At the end of that term, then the president-elect would step in. The bylaws does ask them to be the person who will oversee the planning of at least 2 chapter events each year. That is required. At-large chapters, many do choose to have a vice president for each school, but it is not a requirement. So for the treasurer, these are the 5 areas that we are going to be covering later in our presentation. So if you have specific questions about any of these components, we'll be getting into these in greater detail. The bylaws task your counselor with inducting new members. So that includes communicating with students and nurse leaders about membership, securing their eligibility data, and actually creating a new induction to send them membership invitations. They are also tasked with serving on the governance committee, which is responsible for the chapter bylaws, because they should be so familiar with the eligibility criteria so they can chime in on any bylaws issues. This person does have to be a faculty member. It is the only position that requires that designation, and at-large chapters need to elect a counselor for each school that is part of their chapter. And then we have our secretary, who will be recording and distributing meeting minutes. They keep an official record of chapter activities and actually communicate with members. They are also tasked with updating the officer and committee chair report after an election to make sure that all of the appropriate individuals have access to everything that they need for their role. So that is just the board of directors. Those are the officers that we discussed. Just to give you a heads up, there are 2 required standing committees as well. The governance committee responsible for bylaws and the leadership succession committee, who is the group tasked with preparing the elections and for developing your members into leadership roles. At any given time, you'll have delegates who may be required as well. So right now, we need 2 convention delegates to attend the in-person House of Delegates sessions coming up at the end of October and into November. Periodically, there may be electronic delegates who are needed as well. The nice thing about the bylaws is that they do allow your chapter to have additional committees and leaders as needed. So you can appoint or elect any additional positions. They don't have to be added to your bylaws because the bylaws already account for that. So if you as treasurer need help getting the work done, you have the authority to get together with the other board members to say, I'd really like to put together a finance committee to help me get something done. So that's just the quick overview of kind of where does a treasurer fit into the overall chapter leadership structure, which gives us plenty of time now to actually dive into the specific responsibilities of the treasurer. And we're also going to be talking about some items that are new and some new resources. So even if you have been a treasurer in the past, hopefully there will be something that you can still learn and take away from this presentation. As I mentioned, the treasurer's responsibilities kind of fall into these 5 categories. So you are managing the chapter fund, you prepare the annual budget, develop fiscal policies and procedures. You need to be presenting current financials to the board at every single meeting of the board, and ensuring the submission of financial reports, and there are several of them that we're going to discuss. So we're just going to go in order here, starting with managing a chapter funds. First, I'd like to pull up a poll. So you actually can just click directly on the screen here to answer this question. When is the STTI fiscal year? Hopefully this won't be a surprise for anybody, but everything that we'll talk about around budgeting will revolve around these dates, so we want to make sure everyone's comfortable. Most of you have voted. I'll give it a few more seconds. Again, just click directly on the screen. Whether you think the fiscal year is January 1st through December 31st or July 1st through June 30th. All right, I'll go ahead and close this. And everybody did select the correct answer. Thank you for doing that, which is July 1st through June 30th. So as I mentioned, STTI and all chapters work on this fiscal year, so all of our financial plans are revolving around these dates. Since you are the custodian of chapter funds, your first act of office should have been to gain access to the chapter accounts. Next, you'll want to make sure that you and at least one other person are listed as signatories on each of those chapter accounts. Generally, it is the treasurer and the president who are those signatories, but I would encourage you to look at the way your elections are structured, because you don't want to, if you have the president and treasurer being elected on the same year, then you would have two brand new people as signatories every 2 years, and that can get a little tricky. So maybe looking to see if it needs to be the vice president, or if it needs to be your president-elect, or if the chapter needs to adjust elections so that the president and treasurer aren't coming and going on the same year. But recommended that at least 2 signatories on each account, so that if something happens to one of you, there is still somebody else who has access to those accounts. If you haven't already, you can sign up for direct deposit of your chapter checks. This can save you some time, because the funds from your chapter checks mailed from headquarters are placed directly into your account instead of you having to drive to whatever bank the chapter has selected to deposit it. And I'll show you where more information is on direct deposit once we get into the touring section and we talk about resources that are available to you as treasurer. And each treasurer is also responsible for maintaining accurate financial records. So these records should be archived and passed along to treasurers for the next biennium. So it's important to either develop or maintain an official system of account management and documentation. So our second item that we're talking about is the budget. So the budgeting process is going to be drastically different for each chapter, based on size, your programs and activities, any investments that you have, and those types of factors. So if you are just getting started, just be sure to use all available resources in preparing for the budgeting process. So we do have a budgeting template in the All Chapter Officers work group if your chapter doesn't already have one. That's just one example of something that we have. So if you're just getting started, you don't have to start from scratch. And you also want to engage all chapter leaders in the process because everybody is going to know what initiatives they're responsible for, any activities or events, operations that require money or that are revenue generating. So you don't have to think of every possible thing that could money might need to be spent on. It will also be helpful to consult your chapter's strategic plan. If you don't have one, we also do have a strategic planning template available as well. Basically asks you to identify your chapter's goals for the next 1 to 2 years and then assign actions based on those goals. So everyone kind of comes together to agree, you know, we really need to work on membership recruitment, or we need to work on membership retention and focus our energy and money on those areas. In order to create a balanced budget, obviously you're going to have to identify your expected expenses as well as your income. Some numbers that we like to give you just to make sure everyone's realistic in projecting their income. Right now, only about half of your first year members are going to renew. So you cannot set a realistic budget without taking that into consideration. So however many people you induct this year, generally only half of them are going to renew next year. So we can't rely on 100% of those members to renew and therefore count on that income. Other than first year members, other established members generally renew at about 70%, so that's a little bit higher. Obviously, these numbers are lower than what we would like to see. So again, if in your strategic plan you identify some goals, maybe you want to get your first year membership renewal numbers up, then you might identify some initiatives and some actions to put money towards making that a reality so that you can continue to increase your income. And then once you have that budget created, it should be presented to the board for final approval. So again, you're not in this alone. You do have the rest of the board of directors to help identify those activities and expenses and to then actually put their stamp of approval on the budget. We did mention the chapter checks that do arrive to your chapter with those renewal and induction amounts from your new members as well. And so those do come in regular intervals. So within the fiscal year, you will receive 3 checks, first in March, then in September, and then again in November. So you can see those dates for your renewals and induction dues collected on your behalf during that time period. For September, which is coming up pretty quickly, I wanted to point out that there are also deductions within that check. So that will have to be accounted for in terms of your budget as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about those deductions on our next couple of slides. I also wanted to point out something that changed recently. Within the last year, your induction ceremony fees, you do have the option to charge an optional fee to your candidates. Those are now dispersed on a monthly basis. So that you can see is a new policy as of October 2016. That used to happen much less frequently, but we heard from chapters that they did need that money returned a little bit quicker. So those ceremony fees will come back on a monthly basis instead now. So as I mentioned, the September check does deduct the chapter services fee and the liability insurance from the check. For your chapter services fee, this is based on the number of active members that your chapter has as of June 30th. And this allows STTI chapter services to provide resources to you, such as the collection of chapter dues and all of your ceremony fees, your chapter management system, the circle, your chapter websites, all of your training and communications. This fee helps to offset all of those various items. And then the chapter liability insurance that is deducted from that September check is based on your number of active members as of July 1st. And this helps to protect the chapter against liabilities that can come from daily operations, meetings, and your officially sanctioned chapter events. Not your outside events where you are getting together with non-members, but your general chapter meetings that you have officially taken on yourself as a chapter. This is just some general liability insurance that will cover you in case something potentially hazardous or dangerous occurs. Are there any questions about those deductions? I'll try and pause every so frequently. Again, feel free to type your questions into the question log and hit send. So that brings us to number 3 on our scope of responsibilities. One quick question about the chapter checks: how much does the chapter receive for each member? That is set by the chapter. So your dues for renewal as well as your dues for new members, the chapter determines that amount. So I would say on average, most chapters have their renewal dues about $30. And a lot of chapters have made their new member dues a little bit lower so that those new members can afford their membership. So if you need to check on that amount, you're welcome to contact chapter services or check within the chapter directory to see how much you're charging there. All right, so with our fiscal policies and procedures, it is recommended that your chapter does detail within this document how you're going to manage your chapter funds. So just to tell you a little bit more, if you're not familiar with developing policies and procedures, you have the title and then you have a purpose statement, which is basically a description of your policy and why you are putting this in place. And then the procedure is the step-by-step process that you're going to follow and who's responsible. This can also include a timeline and be date specific. Some of the suggested content that we have for you, especially when it comes to financial components. Officer transitions. So specifically, this policy should state how your financial records and accounts will be transferred to the incoming treasurer. It might also include a timeline for treasurer orientation, as well as how the new treasurer will gain access to accounts, how the second signatory is determined, things of that nature. Another important one will be the accounting system or the record keeping system that your chapter uses. How do you keep record of expenditures and income? How do you document vouchers, receipts, bank statements, canceled checks, and other transactions? If your chapter has checks from headquarters direct deposited, then write a policy that details the process for updating direct deposit information at STTI whenever you have an account change. So if you have a new treasurer who comes in and for whatever reason they have to set up a new account, then they need to update headquarters so that that direct deposit can continue. You'll also want to have some policies around managing and reviewing investments and coordinating audits, how you're going to develop the budget, and a process for dispersing chapter funds, and how leaders will be reimbursed for chapter-related expenditures that they might incur. We do have sample policies and procedures in the All Chapter Officers work group. So again, when we get to that tour component, I can show you where all of that is located. Which brings us to number 4 within our scope of responsibilities, which is to present financials at every board meeting. This doesn't have to be a big to-do. Really, you're just talking about updates to your budget. So any assets, revenue, and expenses since the last meeting, so that everyone is on the same page. They can see, this is where we are at with this initiative. This is how much money we spent. We weren't expecting to spend that much money, so that might impact the next initiative or event that we're working on, or maybe we didn't spend as much as we had planned for. That's the ideal scenario, and now we can actually do something extra instead, or we can invest that money, as well as any upcoming projects and those timelines as well. So it's just allowing some transparency at the board level of this is how everything has fleshed out for this last quarter or this last month or however long it's been since you last updated the board. Which brings us to number 5, which is the submission of financial reports. And there are actually several that the treasurer is responsible for. So we wanted to make sure and include enough time to cover all of these because the treasurer does have more required reports than any of the other positions. So just to walk through each of those, first we have the chapter annual report. It does include a financial section. You will be reminded at least once a month, especially as that deadline approaches. It will be even more frequent through leader lines, which comes on a monthly basis, through the All Chapter Officers Work Group discussions, through personal emails that will tell you the financial section needs to be completed. As treasurer, you're the one who has all of that information. That can be done in the management system. You see the hyperlink there, and that report is coming up. The deadline's coming up pretty quickly. It is August 2nd, so you have, I don't know, about 3 weeks before this is due for 2017. So if your chapter has not submitted it yet, you might want to check in with the president to see where they are with the activity section, and you can just make sure and get the financial section completed. That deadline is always the first Wednesday in August, so it's generally around that first 1 to 7 days where you'll see that deadline shift a little bit, but it is the first Wednesday, so that falls on August 2nd for 2017. The next form that is required, this is only required for chapters in the United States. So if you are located outside of the United States, you won't be filing this specific form, but you can look in to see what your country requires of you. In the United States, when you are in a 501c3, which all chapters are, that means that you are independent. You manage your own records, your own accounting, so you are not included in the taxes that STTI submits to the IRS. You are not included in the taxes that your educational institution submits to the IRS either. You are independent. So you will have to go to the IRS website, by the 15th of November every single year to file this form. It's generally pretty simple, doesn't take too much time, but it is very important because if you forget to file for 3 consecutive years, you can lose your tax exempt status, and then now you have to pay taxes, and you get into a lot of legal issues with your members paying dues and things of that nature. That gets very messy, so just make sure that that is filed each year. The next report is the verification of fees form. This isn't required, but if your chapter does want to adjust your dues amounts at any time, you do only have this form available to you once a year, and you can only make adjustments once a biennium. So this is another thing that you'll want to make sure you have documented within your policies and procedures. You might decide, let's just slowly increase our dues every biennium. So even if that means 10 cents here and there, just to slowly and get members used to those incremental changes. That form is open in the management system between the 1st of January and the 15th of March each year. So if you changed your dues this year, even though you'll see that form again, you will not be able to change them next year. It's only once a biennium. Considerations to keep in mind: your increases are dependent on the Consumer Price Index percentage increase based on your last dues adjustment. So you can't just say, okay, we're going to increase our dues by $5, because the CPI percentage increase might not allow for that amount. So it's really a good idea to check first once that form opens to see what the maximum amount is before you make that proposal to the board. You also have the opportunity to assess lower amount for your new inductees. So some chapters, this opportunity started probably 5 years ago, and they might have set their new member dues amounts to $0. And there are several chapters who have done so to help lessen the burden on their new members. But if they didn't document that correctly, then a treasurer coming in might not realize that that amount is $0, and when they go to make a change in the future, the CPI increase will only allow them to set it at $1 or $2. So once that change has been made, you are at the mercy of the CPI before you can make changes again. And that covers all of the things that are required of you per the bylaws. Just some other items for consideration. What you might see on a job application is your other duties as assigned. Some things to keep in mind as treasurer: fidelity bonding. As a chapter leader, you do have a fiduciary responsibility for safeguarding your chapter's assets. So some chapters will purchase a fidelity bond that covers officers and directors to protect the chapter against dishonest or fraudulent acts such as embezzlement or fraud or theft. There are a number of companies that provide this type of coverage, or you can contact headquarters to get connected with our insurance provider if you want information from them specifically. It's also a best practice to have an audit of the chapter finances every year. Many of you won't really require that every single audit be done by a professional, but it is recommended that at least every other review is done professionally. And then on those other years, you can do an internal review of the finances. And then lastly, those of you who want to invest your chapter dollars really need to seek investment advice from a professional. That isn't something that will be available through STTI headquarters because again, you do manage your chapter funds independent of the headquarters. Something that we like to point out, especially as we go more and more digital in the world, we have heard from chapters about attempted scamming of chapter funds. So just something for you to be aware of. The one that we have heard about from chapters, this scammer pretends to be another officer, creates a fake email account. So they might say, hey, Treasurer, I'm so-and-so, the president. They will know the person's correct name, but they do create a fake email account and use that person's name and ask the treasurer to request a wire transfer into an account, and they provide the account number and that information that's needed. They will create a sense of urgency regarding the transfer. We have this bill, it has to be paid right now. Please wire this amount into this account immediately. To avoid these types of scams, we really need to follow your chapter budget. So if this is something that doesn't sound familiar to you, it probably is for a reason. And this is why it's really important to have those policies and procedures in place regarding reimbursement. So you might say, you know, we're only going to reimburse chapter leaders once we have received an official invoice or an expense voucher with the appropriate proof and documentation, and only if they fall within our budget. And if we, let's say the board approved these items for the budget, we'll reimburse it. If there is something that just happens to come up and it doesn't have pre-approval from the board, maybe you're going to say, okay, we're going to limit it to $200 or $300. Anything over that requires board approval. Read the entire request for reimbursement, including who it came from, their email address. As with any scam or spam, misspelling and poor grammar are indicators of scam activity. And do not wire money unless previously approved by the board of directors. So we have covered a lot of responsibilities for the treasurer, which can be a little bit overwhelming for one person. This is a volunteer position, and we don't want you to become too overwhelmed with all of your responsibilities. So as we mentioned earlier, as a member of the board of the directors, you do have the ability to convene a committee that you can delegate responsibilities to. So this financial committee is one that is semi-popular among chapters because the treasurer does have so much work to be done. So some items that you might have this committee complete might be those fiscal policies and procedures, whether it's reviewing them or creating them, helping you to find an auditor, helping to monitor financial status and put together reports and documentation for board meetings, and any other duties as assigned. Maybe you need them to see what our current dues are set at and how much would we be able to increase them with the next dues change. Just little things that don't necessarily take up a lot of time, but for one person they add up, and so it's nice to have a group that you can delegate those smaller items to. To find members to serve on this committee, you do have the ability to add volunteer positions to your chapter website and invite members to apply for that. So you can get kind of some new individuals in and engaged. Also consider new members, just in talking to them. We know that they renew at a much lower rate, and getting them engaged early on is one way to help encourage them to renew in the future. So that can also help with some of your renewal and retention goals as well. So as promised, do want to tell you some items that are new. Hopefully you've heard about these already, but just in case, we want to make sure that all chapter leaders are informed of some of the new resources and items that are available to you. One of the items that you will notice, and this should happen with the August issue coming out in a couple of weeks, is an upgrade to leader lines. So this is delivered the first Friday of the month, and it still include your position-specific news. So it will say, "Hi, Debbie, as treasurer, here are all the important deadlines coming up." So it's going to tell you about the annual report and the verification of dues form and the IRS Form 990, so that you know this is important to me because I am serving in this position. It's not just general news, it is specific to you. It also will still include important dates and trainings. Some of the items that are new are chapter-specific alerts and notifications, as well as chapter-specific dashboard with membership numbers. So it will tell you, okay, in the last 90 days, here's how many people have renewed their membership, or here's how many people whose membership lapsed. Here's who transferred into your chapter, so that you can follow up with those individuals, or you can encourage the secretary or whomever to follow up with those individuals to say, hey, I noticed that we had a large number of people who didn't renew. We weren't expecting that according to our budget. Is there any way you could reach out to them to encourage them to renew their membership, or to kind of find out why they haven't renewed, so maybe we can put some initiatives together to make an impact there. And then there will also still be news from your regional coordinator. So the most important components will still be there, and we'll also have some additions that should be very valuable to your chapter moving forward. As I mentioned, you can also now add volunteer positions to your chapter website in the circle. So when you are signed in, when you click on the settings button and then volunteer manage opportunities, you could set up a finance committee, put in your description, how much time it's going to take, what the term is, how many people you're looking to fill this position, and then you can actually use the system to issue personal invitation messages to your members to get them to apply for that position. It's really nice because it also tells them when they've been accepted. It tells them thank you when their term is over. So once you kind of set it up, then you can let it flow and let those members apply, and the system will handle everything on the back end, and it allows us to recognize those individuals for serving in that volunteer capacity. And we do have a full tutorial on how to set that up in the All Chapter Officers work group. Another new feature of your chapter website, it does allow you now to email in real time active members from your website. If you recall, you also have the discussion forum, which also emails active members of your chapter. So just wanted to tell you a little bit more about each of them and what each of them achieves. The biggest difference with your email capacity is that it is sent immediately. So as soon as you sign in and hit that email community members button, it's going to send all of your active members a message. This also allows members to unsubscribe, so your chapter is compliant with spam laws. This is also free, so that's nice for you as treasurer, knowing that we don't have to purchase an email service provider in order to stay compliant with spam laws. One downside is that no special formatting can be done within this email. It is just plain text, so you can't bold or do a bulleted list or anything of that nature. And then replies are sent privately to the chapter leader who sent the message. So it does look like a personal email from you to that member specifically, and you will receive those replies. Within the discussion forum, again, the main difference is timing. So the discussion forum is defaulted to send to them at the end of the day. We automatically subscribe your active members to a daily digest. So that means at midnight, it looks at all of the discussions and it sends an email over. So actually, people tend to see it the next morning. This is also spam compliant because it does allow members to unsubscribe, and it does include a formatting toolbar. So if you want your message to look nicer and not just be plain text, the discussion forum would be the way to go. And then replies can be posted publicly for all members to join in the conversation. The person could still choose to reply directly to the person who posted the message, but most reply all, essentially, and include others in that conversation. Just to tell you some upcoming dates of importance, as I mentioned, August 2nd is the deadline to submit the chapter annual report. This is required of all chapters. So again, you'll want to make sure that the financial section is completed well before that date. 1 October is the deadline to submit a nomination for the Showcase of Regional Excellence. And then at the end of October, starting the 28th through the 1st of November, is the 44th Biennial Convention. And the House of Delegates, which is actually the last 2 days, the 31st of October and the 1st of November, chapter participation is required. So your chapter does need to account for that in the budget to send at least one individual for those 2 days. So I do have another poll as we round out our presentation here. Again, I'm going to put this directly on the screen. Just click directly on what you believe to be the correct answer in terms of where can you find all chapter leader resources. Is it the STTI website? Is it the All Chapter Officers Work Group? Or is it both? So just click directly on the bubble on the screen there. Most of you have voted. I'll give it just a couple more seconds. Just click right on your answer. All right. We have a lot of mixed responses here, and actually only 9% got it correct. The answer is the All Chapter Officers Work Group. So there is no longer any STTI chapter leader resources on the STTI website. It is all contained within the All Chapter Officers Work Group, which gives us one location to update all of the information and make sure that you have everything correct. So I am actually going to go over to the All Chapter Officers Work Group to show you where everything is located. We can take a quick tour. Also feel free to type in any additional questions that you have. I have at least one that I'm holding on to here to get answered. So if you think of something else, go ahead and feel free to submit that now, and we'll make sure and get it responded to before we end our session. The All Chapter Officers Work Group is located in the circle, which I've put the direct link into the chat log of your control panel. It is thecircle.nursingsociety.org. circle.org is the direct link, the circle.nursingsociety.org. So again, anytime you're looking for a resource for your role as a chapter leader, this is where you need to come. When you click on groups and then my groups from the purple toolbar, you are automatically assigned to the All Chapter Officers work group as soon as the secretary puts those term dates in for each position. It does list your groups alphabetically, so you should see All Chapter Officers work group right near the top. It's also where you'll find a link to your chapter website as well. The very first thing that I recommend you do is to check the announcements area. So we can see just 2 days ago, there was an announcement added about convention chapter pre-sales. So you can order some materials, chapter materials, and pick them up at convention to help save on shipping costs. There will always be a link to meet one-on-one with STTI staff. So if you need some help sitting and going through your budget specifically, or maybe you want to set up volunteer opportunity to get that finance committee in place and you just can't get it figured out on your chapter website. Any chapter related topic where you want to sit one-on-one with staff, share screens and things of that nature, you fill out this form with at least 3 dates, at least a week into the future, and you'll be matched up with the appropriate staff person. And then there will always be a link to the management system, which is where you go to make those dues changes whenever that form is opened on January 1st. So again, coming directly to this group will get you wherever else you might need to be. Next, if you click on the Library tab near the top of the group, scroll down to the folders, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you can read these a little bit better. The folder that we're looking for is the by position resources folder. When you expand it, you'll notice that there is a folder specific for the treasurer and the finance committee. So everything that you need related to your role will be listed here. So we can see here there's the verification of renewal fees, IRS tax filing requirements for U.S. chapters, information on investing in assets, financial policies and procedures. There's information on the chapter checks as well as the deductions and direct deposit that we mentioned, budgeting, and then if you need help with the chapter annual report, there is also a chapter annual report folder. So as I mentioned, most of the content that you need will be here within the treasurer's folder. This is also where we'll post today's recording as well as the slides. There are some answers to frequently asked financial questions, things of that nature. We also have a folder called Samples and Templates that I would recommend you click through the policies and procedures that are here. So you'll see this one is called Sample Policies and Procedures from Sigma Theta Tau International. So a lot of those financial ones that we talked about are included in these samples. And then we do get a lot of financial questions that are posted in this work group, and feel free, if there is something that you're looking for and you don't find the answer to it within these folders, to post it within the discussion forum, and then either staff or other chapters can provide that correct response to you. Scrolling up to the top of the page here, we also have an event calendar. that tells you all of the dates of importance coming up that are specific to every chapter leader. So if for some reason the secretary is out of town for a couple of weeks and you agree to step in and help out, you can see all of the deadlines associated with any position here on this calendar. So I know a lot of you wear multiple hats, so even though you might officially be the treasurer, you tend to help out other people with their own deadlines and requirements. So this is where you can come to get a good snapshot of what's happening.